name is Katie Drasser, and I'm the Managing Director of the Aspen Global Innovators Group at the Aspen Institute, which, along with the Health, Medicine, and Society program, hosts Aspen Ideas Health. I want to thank you all for joining us today. While the pandemic has prevented us from gathering in person, we are excited to continue to host informative and inspiring conversations between leading health practitioners, advocates, artists, scientists, and innovators. Now, we are honored to be hosting this conversation between Mia Birdsong, author of the new book, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community, and Veronica Chambers, senior editor at the New York Times and an author herself. Mia's book came just in time as the world faces a global pandemic and a historic racial reckoning that are both giving way to new models of community and liberation. If you have not read Mia's book, I highly recommend picking up a copy for yourself and gifting to folks in your community. See the chat box for a link to the book. So let me briefly and properly introduce these speakers. Mia is a pathfinder, community curator, and storyteller who steadily engages the leadership and wisdom of people experiencing injustice to chart new visions of American life. You'll hear more about her new book today that examines an array of community life and points us toward the promise of our collective vitality. Mia hosts the podcast More Than Enough, which focuses on the guaranteed income movement, and she is a senior fellow of the Economic Security Project, an Aspen Ascend Fellow, and a New America California Fellow. Veronica Chambers is a senior editor at the New York Times. She's co-written 4 New York Times best-selling memoirs and is the author of her own critically acclaimed memoir, Mama's Girl. She recently authored 2 new children's books for this summer, including one that came out today, called Shirley Chisholm is a Verb. Veronica is a 2019 James Beard Award winner for her work with chefs J.J. Johnson and Alexander Smalls on Between Harlem and Heaven, an Afro-Asian cookbook. Born in Panama and raised in Brooklyn, her work often reflects her Afro-Latina heritage. So it's clear we're among legends of our time. Mia and Veronica, thank you both for being here with us today. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Veronica. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie.
Hi. Thank you so much, Katie and Mia. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. Your book, How We Show Up, it would be an incredible book at any time, but I think the fact that it was published this year is especially powerful. Can you talk a little bit about how this book coming out this year in the middle of everything we've experienced from the pandemic to Black Lives Matter movement, how do we show up for all of this, Mia? Tell us.
I wrote this, I thought I was spending 2 years researching and writing a book. But what I was really doing was going on my own kind of quest to find out how I have deeper, more connected relationships in my life. And I obviously did not know that we were going to enter this moment when I was writing it, but I think that so much of what I believe and has been made clear to me again and again is that we are deeply interdependent. We are, as human beings, our brains are really wired for connection. We're pack animals. And that connection is inherent to who we are, and we really need each other. And the pandemic has revealed that in very, very deep ways to more of us. And I think that, we're just recognizing how interdependent we are. And because of the failures of so many of the systems of support and care that exist for us, because of the failures of that, we're really having to fill in the gaps for each other. And I think that what's been fascinating about kind of the pandemic, and then layered upon that, this kind of another in the cycle of white violence with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others, we're seeing a kind of solidarity that we haven't really seen before. And I wonder if what we'll find is that sense of solidarity was partly made possible by the kind of stark, the ways in which our interdependence was made starkly real to so many of us because of the pandemic. So part of how why I felt like I needed to go on my own journey is because I felt this deep tension between kind of what I'd been, and anybody who grows up in this country, kind of the way that we're socialized into around the American dream. And it's this beautiful, like, powerful story that, anyone with a little like grit and determination can just work really hard and find success and happiness. And success and happiness is kind of like written as independence. The insular nuclear family is very much part of that. Being wealthy is part of that. So we have these ideas about what it means to be successful and happy. At the same time, like, part of what has been clear to me, and especially as I myself kind of, climbed that ladder, is that it asks of us to think about success as like winners and losers. It asks of us to take pride in like doing things ourselves and not asking for help. Asking for help is seen as weakness. It's a kind of orientation toward our lives that really seeks to disconnect us from other people, and seeks to really disconnect us from building, from recognizing our interdependence and actually building the kind of community that's necessary to really support us. And so I felt this tension in my own life, and I wanted to talk to people who I felt like had figured out how to build family and friendship and community in ways that were sustainable and inclusive and deep and broad. And in my life and in my own community, the places that I've seen that is among people who are to some degree excluded from the American dream. So it's Black folks, it's poor people, it's queer people, it's sex workers and unhoused people, people with disabilities. So that's the expertise that I was seeking. And so I spent 2 years interviewing people who are in my own community, people who are like, in the communities of people who are in my community, to really find out what it looks like to build deep, connected family, chosen, legal, and biological, to think about friendship in ways that go beyond kind of our understanding of like the boundaries of what a friendship is, and to really be in community in ways that are about like true solidarity and rethinking, everything from like food to safety.
Right, right. I think one of the things that's so powerful about your book is that it reminds us that those who've climbed certain ladders aren't the only ones who have lessons to give. I mean,
Yes.
when I read your book, it made me think about my grandmother who raised all these kids who didn't go to college. And she used to always tell us, she's like, if you don't smell food coming from your neighbor's kitchen, you take a plate. And it doesn't matter if you're mad at her or she took your man or this or that.
Yes.
Like, this is how you show up. And it was fun
Yes.
because I think sometimes people say to me, well, like that I'm not, that, that I might be giving or I might do this or I might do that. But I really was taught that this is how you are. It's not a matter of being generous or being nice. It's like, it's how you give and it's how you get. And I think that your book is such a powerful reminder that we look to only a certain kind of person as being like the teacher or the person to give, that the idea of philanthropy even is so loaded. And I just feel like that, I think of, you quote I feel like one of the ways that your book feels like home to me is the people that are in it, like Audre Lorde and James Baldwin. It's like setting a table for home. But I think a lot about what Audre Lorde talked about a litany for survival. And I feel so strongly that your book is more relevant than ever because it does give us this like litany of ways to survive and thrive, even when the world at large is not changing and fixed and being fixed as fast as we would hope.
Yes, right. Because it's like I think about like our social contracts in these like two different places, right? There's this one piece that really is about what our systems and institutions are like owe us, and our responsibility to engage with them, to hold them accountable for those things or direct them in whatever way. But then there is also like what we owe each other. And I think that if we don't have like, I'm so grateful that I did all of this work before the pandemic, because I really like in the process of asking all these questions and interviewing and finding all this information from these amazing experts, I was practicing like what I was being taught. And I really deepened my own community so that when the pandemic happened, I was like, oh, phew, like I'm so glad that I figured some of this stuff out. Because what got us here, right? Like, not necessarily, I mean, the pandemic, if in some ways, but certainly the failure of our systems to meet the pandemic in ways that actually care for us. What got us here is that kind of false sense of independence, that the narrative of the American dream is what our leaders do. In addition to like, kind of tremendous amounts of, I mean, the American dream is like laden with white supremacy and patriarchy and extractive capitalism. And I'm like, that's what got us here. Like, that is not what's going to save us. Like that is, and partly what I saw is like, in addition to the ways in which that kind of orientation creates systems that do not care for us and do not do the things that we need our institutions to do. The people who I see in those positions of leadership, who I see meeting that level of success, are miserable. And I feel like and so much what inspired me was that I kept getting these, I kept being in these conversations with people who by all kind of accounts were incredibly successful. And they would tell me about how like disconnected they felt and how lonely they were, and the ways in which they did not have people in their life who showed up for them. And I think about the smaller than we would think given the loudness of them, the people who are refusing to wear masks right now because they think it interferes with their freedom. And what I see in that is I'm like if you've ever experienced solidarity, if you've ever been cared for so deeply that you don't have to worry about, that like you're going to be okay no matter what, because you have people who are going to like love you and make sure that you're all right. If you've experienced that, like you wouldn't do that. And I'm just like, oh, like the refusal to wear masks because you think it infringes upon your freedom, I think is actually a form of like self-hatred. And not because like you hate yourself and you're going to get sick, but that you don't believe that other people are going to show up for you and care for you, people you don't know, people in your community. And I think that builds a sense of resentment, and the way that it's showing up is people, I don't think that's obviously not about like a real understanding of what freedom is. I think it really is like that people, they don't love themselves.
Right. There's a part in your book where you talk about, I'm hypertexting a little bit, but there's a really beautiful line where you talk about that that retreat you took with your mentor and that group of women, and you talk about being able to ask for what you need and what you want. Mm-hmm. And I think about when we talk about loneliness, when we talk about connection, I mean, it seems like that's a very core building block, right? Like just the confidence, when you talked about people feeling loved, I mean, I think that's something that really cuts across a lot of different segments of our society. Can you just talk about what you learned about asking in the process of making this book?
Yeah, I mean, partly like we are really allergic to asking for help. We have been told that asking for help means that we failed in some way, or that asking for help is like a show of weakness. And I learned a lot of things. I think partly what I learned is that asking for help is one of the things that we actually do to honor the people who care about us. One of the women I interviewed, Sage Crump, who's an amazing facilitator and culture keeper, she talked about how if someone she cares about is suffering and she could do something to relieve that suffering and they don't ask for it, she talked about how much that hurt her and how painful it is for her to find out that someone she cares about is not asking for help when she could provide whatever it is that they need. So I feel like there's this way in which we have a responsibility, like when we're in community with each other, we have a responsibility to ask for the things that we need, because our loved ones want us to be okay, right? They want us to be well. The other thing, and this is summed up really beautifully by this woman, Amaretta Morris, who I quote in the book. She talks about this divine circle of giving and receiving. Mm-hmm. And that, she says something like, we often think about what giving does for the person who's receiving it, but we don't think about what it does for the giver. And she says, like, just like that if we don't ask for what we need, we're actually interrupting a circle of giving and receiving. And it's not about, kind of earning, like giving something to somebody and therefore they owe you, right? It's not about that. It is not about, it's not about like earning points with your God. It really is that when we are in community with each other, when we are in connection and we're in this circle of giving and receiving, that both people, right, in that equation are practicing generosity. Mm-hmm. That it is generous to offer and to give something, but is also a kind of generosity to receive, and that the person who is, you're giving the person who is giving a gift, right? And I think seeing, and I've seen that, and I feel like this has been my experience too, like during this pandemic. So for example, I have a friend, Sarah, when the sheltering in place started, she texted me and like 2 or 3 other people saying she was going to the grocery store and could she get us anything? And my immediate reaction was to say no, just because I was like, that just, like, going to the grocery store is a pain in the butt, and I didn't want to like put her out. And then I caught myself and I was like, wait a minute. I actually do have something I need. I was out of salt, or I was about to be out of salt, and like I can't cook anything without salt. So right. And I was like, okay, she's offering, like she made the, I didn't go and ask her, right? Like she made the offer. I was like, let me practice the generosity of receiving and say yes. So I told her that I needed salt. She brought it to me, put it on the porch, and I saw her through my like front window and we waved at each other. And the look on her face of just like joy and delight reminded me like viscerally how powerful it can be to provide something for the people that we love. So I think we all need to do a better job of the asking, but I also think we need to do a better job of the offering. It is one thing to say to somebody, I'm going to the grocery store, can I get you something? Or may I bring your family a meal? It's a different thing to say, let me know if you need anything.
Right. Make it easy.
Because let me know if you need anything means that the other person has to think of a thing, and then they have to do the calculus of like, are you somebody who can provide that thing? And then they have to do the asking. Yes. And I think one of the things that this moment that we're in right now asks of us is to lean into what we know about the people we're close to, like our intuition about who they are and what might bring them some ease, so that we can make specific offers. And part of what that does is it's a kind of intimacy, right? It allows us to know each other more. Instead of being like, everybody's got their own stuff handled, right? And we're all going about our business, like struggling behind the scenes and pretending we're okay. It allows us to be known to each other. And for both, the givers and the receivers, I feel like it's one of the things that has during, this pandemic for me has like strengthened the connections I have with other people in this really beautiful way.
Yes.
That also, let's be clear, like that's my safety net. Like if some like, I was going to start swearing and I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. If what hits the fan, right?
Yeah.
If it really goes down, the people who I've been in these the relationships of mutual generosity are the people who I know I can count on.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I learned a lot about asking and offering
I
help.
love that. And I think some of the questions, I think we have a few minutes for questions. If you have questions and answers, please drop them in the Q&A. I think we've been answering questions about connection during the pandemic. I definitely want to say that I do think your book is a great gift. I also think hearing you read your book is a really wonderful experience. Not all authors actually record them. So I think that's very powerful. There's a question about what the Black Lives Matter movement has taught us about reclaiming community.
I mean, movements are always a form of community building and lean on community. You can't have movements without having community. And I think that, one of the things I hope people are doing in this moment is joining, right? Whether that's going to uprisings or protests or specific organizations. One of the things we find when we join is we find our people, right? We find because it's not just, when we think about like politics, it's not an abstract kind of like intellectual exercise to think about and behave in ways that align with our politics, because our politics are very personal. The Black Lives Matter movement literally is about Black people's lives, and frankly, it's about all of our lives. Ain't nobody free unless Black people are free.
Yeah.
So I think part of what this moment is inviting us to do is to recognize that, and to recognize that this movement really is about like our collective liberation, and that it should be personal for everyone.
Yes. I think that's so important. I think one of the things that I feel this moment in the pandemic has really highlighted is the whole you problem versus me problem. Like the we problems have become so much more apparent. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm just going through some of the questions about, in terms of this asking, in terms of putting yourself out there. I think there's such a thing in your book. You talk about a guy that you kind of recognized as being your person, even though on the surface you didn't have a lot in common. What about the misses? What about the times when you show up for someone and you think they're your people and they're not? Like, how do people heal through that? Because I think that's part of like the grown-up life that's tough, right?
Yes.
Like neighbor that you do everything for and then they don't.
So yes. So one of the things I think that's also important when we think about like the giving and receiving piece is that it's not just about like me and you, right? So I may have a relationship in which we have this idea that we need to have like balance in all of our relationships, right? We both need to like equally contribute. And like, number one, like not everybody is equally capable.
Right.
Two, sometimes the arc of that, it could be years, right? Like maybe I spend more time contributing in the beginning of a relationship, and then like on the back end, the other person spends more time contributing. The other thing I think about though is that I have I have things that I need and want from the people in my life. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting all of those things from like a community of people, not from like one individual relationship. And I think part of how we think about like marriage and partnerships is that like, here's this individual who's going to provide all these things for me, and I'm going to provide all these things for them, as opposed to recognizing that we actually need a community of people to get the things we need. So in some relationships, I may be giving more than the other person is, but in other relationships, I may be getting more. And I think as long as we are like tending to our boundaries, and as long as we're not I think the signal for me is like, do I feel resentful about this? right?
Mhm.
Like, and if I'm feeling resentful, then I need to check in about like what. So my therapist once said to me that resentment is information for me, which pissed me off because I always thought of resentment as like the way that I get to feel like indignant and mad because somebody else has messed up, right? But she was, I mean, she basically was, she was saying is that it's information for me that I've allowed a boundary to be crossed like previously, and I actually need to like figure out what that is so that I'm not giving more than I can. You know, and I think when in a relationship, if it's not working out, like that's not personal. That's just like, it's not a good fit.
Yes.
And good and like great to find that out. And hopefully it's because the person has been really clear about it.
Right.
And like, you know, we go lick our wounds and then we like keep going. But part of it is about like when I ask for something, I often ask a group of people as opposed to one person. So, because I know I'm going to get a yes someplace. And then
Yeah.
deal with like rejection because somebody says no.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think one of the key things, oh my God, we're almost out of time. It was, luckily I have your phone number. I'll just call you and we'll continue.
Yes, totally.
No, but I think one of the key things, the cornerstones of your book, is that there's a way that showing up for each other becomes part of showing up for ourselves. And it's walking that line is part of how we kind of walk into this next grown-up phase of our lives.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. I mean, I feel like so much of about the relationships that I learned about was that like people were being grown-ups in these relationships. And part of that requires a level of self-awareness and kind of tending to your own stuff first. And again, because like you can't be in kind of workable relationships with other people if you haven't like aren't dealing with your own stuff. And that's not to say that like you got to figure it all out before you can be in relationship with people. That's not it. But it really is about kind of building some deep self-awareness of like what your boundaries are and like what your yeses are and what your nos are, so that when you're in relationship with other people, you can really stand solidly in those places. One of the things I learned partly from, and I practice with our mutual friend Sabrina, is receiving people's no as information about them and like them like letting me know about who they are. And that changes it because I think often we receive no's as rejection, right? We think that it's something information about us and it's not. It really is information about other people. So I think doing that work to like get to a place where you can like process your feelings in your relationships so that you know what's yours to deal with and what somebody else's is really important. And you know, and that those are the things that in our relationships with our partners and with our friends and our family members and our neighbors actually allow us to build these safety nets for ourselves, and allow us to be seen by other people, which I think is like one of the things we all really long for.
Yeah, I love this. This has been a conversation with Mia Birdsong, author of the new book, How to Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friends, and Community. And I will say that this is a prescriptive book, but it's also a book that just feels like a gift to all of us. And I think finding quiet times or moments to read it, or even better, listening to her read it, is a great way to nurture ourselves and kind of get ready for all that's ahead. It's been a year.
Thank you, Veronica.
You.